you have two choices in every time you wake up in the morning. You can do things that'll lead you to happiness. You can do things that'll make you suffer. And there are things that are neutral in the middle, but often every moment gives you this ability, like what are you going to choose? That's going to lead you in this direction, and what are you going to choose that's going to lead you in that direction?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my show. After a brief hiatus, I am back with a very special guest, my friend Manoj. We are going to be diving into the topics of mindfulness and meditation, how to cultivate a sustainable mindfulness practice and integrate what you learn and the qualities that you start to embody as a result of that. So before I get into it, I would like to read a bit about you, because we have met once before and we've had a really wonderful conversation at a party in Venice before. But after doing some research, I learned quite a bit more about you. So I'm going to do some bragging for you.
All right,
if that's
please.
Okay. All right. So Manoj Dias, born and raised in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, he is an animated speaker, humble teacher, and thought leader in the mindfulness space, once tethered to a life of self-management instead of self-awareness. He now intimately understands what it means to be healed from the inside out. Through mindfulness and meditation, Manoj has helped thousands of people around the world trade mania for pause, so that they may live fearlessly in honor of a happier and more meaningful life. In 2015, he founded A Space, Australia's first multidisciplinary drop-in meditation studio. In 2020, A Space was acquired by Open, which is a modern meditation organization based in California, where Manoj is a co-founder. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned earlier, Manoj, we met briefly at a party in Venice, and although our conversation was brief, I couldn't help leave that conversation wanting to know more about you. You have this mysterious, yes, calm and peaceful essence about you that leaves me wanting to know how you've created such a great presence. And hopefully through this conversation, I can start to understand more about you and where you come from. So welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, Nimai. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's nice to see that I've managed to fool some people when I meet them at parties that I'm this way all the time. But, it's I believe that, we contain multitudes in our experience. So, yes, on one hand, there is this quality and skill of presence that I've developed, that I've trained in, almost half my life for. But there's also this other side of me, which I lovingly embrace, which is, all of the anger and then the sadness and the stress and the anxiety. And so it's nice to have that reflected back to me, though, when someone meets me for the first time. They're like, hey, you feel calm and struck by your presence. It's a compliment. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I've been on multiple podcasts too, and it's always a bit interesting hearing somebody read a synopsis of what you've done and what you're currently doing. Would your younger self be surprised at hearing the evolution or the story of what you've been able to do? Yeah. Is this something you envisioned for yourself early on in life?
No, never. Not at all. Like even when you were saying you was raised in the Theravada Buddhist tradition, like, yes, I was raised like that in Sri Lanka, and I moved to Australia when I was 5 years old. And then I was really disconnected from, spirituality, religion. Like I wasn't necessarily trained in meditation from a young age. It was just around me. And if you'd asked the version of me that was in college, that was just partying all the time, and drinking a lot and like not sleeping much, about meditation, I would have laughed like most people actually did, because back then it wasn't it was never a profession you could aspire to be. You just heard of monks doing it. There was never like meditation teachers, and so it seems completely wild to me that the anxious ADHD riddled teenager that I was is now teaching people how to be present, how to be compassionate, how to understand their mind, because that's really all I struggled with growing up.
I have this really strong belief that we have complete ownership of everything that's ever happened into our lives. Even before we were even born, I believe that our soul chooses our parents because our parents are the two perfect teachers and the perfect environment for our soul to learn the lessons that we were destined to learn in this lifetime. So I'm really grateful for my previous versions of my younger self too. I also similarly grew up in a spiritual community. It was a Hare Krishna community. So I was exposed to spirituality, meditation, bhakti yoga, just mantra yoga as well. Counting rounds and japa was part of our daily routine. We'd go to the temple, and I strayed away from it in my teenage and early adulthood. Went into traditional college life. Sounds like something very similar to you, just partying, trying to find my way in this world. And I look back at those times in my life, and they've given me such clarity and such meaning and for purpose of what I'm doing now. Do you feel similar to that?
Yeah, I love that story. Absolutely. And I think, much of what a meditation teacher really does is helps people really understand their mind and helps people to develop a level of clarity around, not only their mind, but also their worldly experience. So, a lot of what I do now is to help people regulate their nervous system, see clearly, so when challenges occur in their life, they know how to respond to it. They'll choose things that feel a bit more wholesome as opposed to going down a destructive path. And the previous versions of me, that's what I was longing for. I wanted something like that. I wanted someone to tell me that the anxiety I felt is not personal. It's not because I'm a bad person. There's something wrong with me. It's just a natural part of my experience. I wanted someone to say that suffering is not also personalized. It's very an impersonal experience. And then there was also a way to train my mind and train my brain and train my heart to think differently, feel differently, act differently. Because, again, growing up, my understanding at that time was like, this is the mind I am given. This is the body that I'm given. Nothing I'm doing is going to work. I just have to deal with it, right? But over time, you realize, like neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to reshape and reform itself, you can actually change your life. So, that's a lot of gratitude for all those experiences.
Was there a particular experience that was the catalyst for this kind of introspective work that you do now?
Yeah, I think I had a pretty big panic attack when I was working in advertising and banking, and it was a very tough. I know it seems wild, right? It was a hard job, and I was questioning for many years, like, is this what my life is? I remember thinking that, like, is this it? Like, I was successful from a young age. I had a great salary, I had cool friends, I was partying a lot, all of that. And I'm like, is this it? Like, is this it? Because it felt like there was something missing. Like, I had all the trappings that should make me happy, but there was something deep inside where I was like, there's something missing here. And, like we're talking a little bit about life kind of throwing things at you, with the house before. And it was almost like life is like, here's this panic attack. So you can just take a look at your life and really just stop. And, I didn't realize I was operating under low levels of anxiety and stress. I was drinking a lot. I was eating unhealthy food. All these health conditions kind of came together with a panic attack. And then when that happened for about 2 years, I was really just exploring ways to get healthy. Tried all the medications, tried all the different therapeutic applications. Some worked for a period of time. Some I developed addictions to. And nothing seemed to really transform the suffering that I was going through until by a very serendipitous set of circumstances, a friend invited me to come to a meditation class. And the meditation class was a Buddhist meditation class where a teacher was teaching very gentle yoga movements and was telling us about Buddhist philosophy. And then we sat. And I had an epiphany in that class. I was like, wow, it's the first time I'm actually able to witness my mind instead of just being a slave to my mind. And that really was the first step in my kind of transformation. And I ended up studying meditation with this teacher every day, went down the Buddhist path, almost decided to take up robes and go down the monk route.
Wow.
But yeah, that was kind of the catalyst for it.
Wow. Wow. There's so much I can relate to in your story. Also, uh, there's so much there. I also worked in corporate America. I was an engineer for 5 years
Wow.
before.
Did you even fit into business suits like
I was the guy that was clearly like not supposed to be there, like barely fitting into my shirt, walking around with a jug of water every day in oil and gas, which is a very kind of traditional, like archaic business model. Although there are many new technologies and advances, it's still very much so an industry of the past. It still exists today. And I had a moment similar to you where I had a panic attack, this surge of energy rushed through me, and impulsively quit my job. Not so impulsively, there was many things adding up to that moment, but also realized very similarly to you that I was also suffering from just this deep sense of emptiness, of longing. I had all the trappings, like you said, really great salary, great house, all of the material possessions that I could ask for, but really felt this deep sense of emptiness when it came to like a purpose, like a sense of fulfillment, and which ultimately led me to what I'm doing today. And I can relate so much to your story. I'm curious for you, whenever you had that epiphany in that first yoga meditation class, like, was it just the first time that you had actually sat and like kind of observed what was going on instead of being kind of pushed around by the waves, so to speak?
Yeah, it was like that. It was just I noticed a lot of thoughts going through my mind in that class, and I was able to realize, again, I didn't have to be a victim to it. I could notice it. But there was one thought that came up, and I felt it in my body, and that thought was, this is going to change your life. This is it.
Oh, wow.
And when I had it, it was just like it was a different kind of thought. It was like a full body, like, oh, you need to be here. You need to come back. And I think over the years, what I've learned to do is to rebuild that trust with my body and with my intuition and with my innate knowing, because I didn't have that, right? Because if you're an anxious person, you have so many thoughts that you're trying to decipher which one to trust and which one not to trust, that over a period of time, you begin to lose all connection to that. And so for me, when I had that, it was like, oh, there is something there that knows beyond my conceptual mind. There is something in my body that is communicating to me. How can I rebuild this ability to trust that? And over the last 15, 16 years, that's what I've been trying to do.
Yeah, that's a big leap of faith too, outside of logic. That you clearly have a very hyperactive mind as well. You're marketing, you're in that world, and like thinking is part of the I guess the distraction from the intuition, right? It's like denying the feeling because doesn't make sense, or it's not logical.
Right. Well, I think, a lot of it is that, over the years, I've learned that we first feel things in the body, and then the mind begins to add the narrative to it. And partly that's because it gives us a sense of safety. If we understand why it's happening, then we feel comfortable and at ease. But life isn't really like that, right? Sometimes things happen that you can't explain, that make no sense at all. So mindfulness practice is so much about just being able to feel the experience, just being able to feel it in the body and not attach any kind of story to it. Just being able to really be in what it is I'm feeling without story. And that can be a tremendously healing place for many of us, especially the people with like overactive minds, is to just feel the anxiety or feel the sadness or feel the euphoria and not attach meaning to it.
How does one get into that practice? Because it seems like in myself included, I've found ways to escape those feelings. It was never like I didn't have the tools or resources to confront them or to really just honor them and allow me to feel the experience. It was much more for me, I would run away from it. And whether that was through escapism through like alcohol, or maybe escapism through achievement or acquirement or conquest, whatever that was, how did you begin to really unpack that and say like, okay, I'm going to be with this emotion instead of just mask it or avoid it.
Yeah, I really loved everything that you just said, because meditation, if we don't really understand the practice, can be another form of escapism, right? Um, a lot of people in about a week's time will start their New Year's resolutions, and a lot of it is around, I'm going to meditate this year, or I'm going to exercise this year, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And we have to begin all of these intentions with the idea, first of all, the recognition that we're whole and we're complete. No matter if I can bench press 200 kilos, we call it kilos in Australia.
That's a lot.
Yeah, like 200 kilos, or that shows you how much I exercise. Whether I can meditate every day or whether I'm at my peak performance, like I'm whole and I'm complete and I'm a good person. But we often begin it with this sense of emptiness. It's like, oh, if I meditate, I'll be a better person. If I exercise, I'll be a better person, and all of these things. And so the place to first begin is to recognize that we're whole and complete, and then begin to trust that our experience will unfold how it's meant to unfold. We have to have a lot of patience. We can have all these grandiose plans and ideas, but having patience that the spiritual path takes a long time. And I forgot the actual quote, but one teacher actually said, slow progress, instant realization. I think the quote was, I might have been butchering it, where you can feel sometimes that our whole life is just showing up for a practice. But then one day we'll have a moment where we're like, oh, all those years of practice make sense. And, I've had moments like that where I've been in a relationship, for example, and I've just had this realization one day, oh, this is not it. Like, I'm in familiar patterns of wanting to love someone that's unavailable or something like that. And like, that's a byproduct of our practice, right? I'm sorry, I think I completely forgot your question.
No,
was going
I love that. It was establishing that practice of feeling safe enough to feel whatever is there and be with it, instead of trying to mask it or escape it.
Yeah. I love that, because over time, when we give ourselves patience, what we actually begin to learn is that a lot of our problems may feel like they're in the mind, and 80-90% of it is, but the initial sensation begins in the body. So an example of that is anxiety. From someone that's suffered a lot of anxiety, I would first feel the stomach start to churn, the hands start to get sweaty, the heart start to quicken, and straight away I would go to the mind. I'm like, oh shit, I'm having a panic attack, or I'm anxious. I need to feel safe in the moment. So I might go and eat lots of food, because that for me was a soothing mechanism. Or I might go and disassociate, jump on my Instagram and just doom scroll. But over time we learn that, okay, can I just be with the feeling instead of the story? And the feeling is largely uncomfortable, right? Because hand is doing this, the heart is doing that, the stomach is doing this. But just to be with the body and give it space to express itself, how it's expressing itself, and to bring in this element of compassion. And something I often say to myself now is that it's okay for me to feel this. And that just softens everything. Like if I'm feeling anxious or scared, I'm like, oh, it's okay for me to feel this. Then you're starting to build a trust with your body, and you're not over exaggerating the fear, the pain, the anxiety. You're just allowing the body to express itself. And now this takes time, like patience. It takes the ability to just bear witness to something without interfering it. And it takes a lot of compassion. And the last thing I'll say is it's not easy. It takes a lot of practice. It takes a lot of times of just showing up and recognizing you're going into fear states, you're creating narratives, you're just overstating the experience. And then over time you realize, oh, it's okay. You can be with it. You can bear witness to it without any story.
That's so beautiful. I love the way you put that, because it is almost like the mind adds a layer of suffering on top of it. Like there's the experience, which is just what it is, and then it's our interpretation or perspective or meaning that we give it, which can sometimes end up snowballing and perpetuating the experience. Right?
And I think that the best way to describe that in the Buddhist lexicon is there's a story called the Tale of the Two Arrows. I think the Sanskrit or the Pali word for it is the Salata Sutta. And as the story goes, the Buddha spoke about one day someone coming to him or witnessing someone first get shot by an arrow. And this arrow is a metaphor for all the shitty things that happen in our life, heartbreak, people leaving us, death, sickness, losing our jobs. These things are inherently very painful and they hurt and no one likes it. But then we tend to shoot ourselves with a second arrow. And this second arrow is the story we tell us about the first arrow. It's like, oh, I don't deserve this. I'm unworthy. I'm a victim. This always happens to me. And as the Buddha kind of poses the question, like, which one do you think hurts the most? And which one do you think is the harder to pull out? And it's the second arrow, right? So instead of kind of being with and just gently, lovingly taking the arrow out and tending to it, we tend to just add the story. And so much of our lives are like this. Instead of being with painful experiences, we create unhealthy stories.
I love that story too. I'm going to remember that because it's so true. For me, one of the, I guess, tools for me to have a objective look at my experience was curiosity. Instead of this judgment or narrative that I had been placing on an experience, it was the approach of, like, that's it. Just the approach of like the feeling, instead of being like, oh, this sucks. Like, I want this to go away. Why is this happening to me? This always happens, like you said. It's more like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
Just a little bit of a loosening of the grip of the mind on the narrative.
Yeah.
And it was just enough for me to wedge, like, enough space for me to create a little bit of a more distance and just keep wedging it until I got to a place where I was like, oh, okay, this narrative that I've been perpetuating from very early on is not serving me. It's actually really affecting me in ways that I wasn't aware of. And bringing that objectivity to the experience has allowed me to have a completely new view of my experience.
I mean, curiosity is the heart of mindfulness, right? Like what is happening here? Like, and then another follow-up question is, where is it happening? Do you feel the sadness in your belly? Do you feel it in your heart? Do you feel it in your hands? And as you keep going down this path of like, okay, like, who is this happening to? Like, this is kind of a deeper kind of question, but even that question just allows you to create a separation between, oh, this is my anxiety versus, oh, anxiety is here.
Yeah.
And so there's not this personalization of the experience.
I love that. So one thing that I wanted to ask you, because I am also a coach, and I really, over the last 5 years, have been coaching people predominantly through the lens of how to become physically fit. So what I've learned through my experience is that the physicality is a symptom in many cases of the mentality. So the link between being physically fit and mentally fit, and how those two support one another. And what I found is that the more and more I spoke with my clients to try to understand, like, these are your goals, this is what you want for yourself, this is the plan laid out before you, all you have to do is follow it. Time and time again, people would fail, they wouldn't adhere to a program. So learning how to ask more questions of what was really happening in their experience so that I could help them achieve that goal, pretty much most of the time led to a narrative of the mind. And something that had been telling themselves, maybe it's unworthiness, maybe it's lack of safety, maybe it's disconnection from the body altogether, or maybe a relationship with food that has somehow played this really important role for keeping them feeling safe and comfortable. And what would be your experience, or do you have any comment on the connection between mental fitness and physical fitness?
Yeah, I mean, I think you explained it really beautifully. There's such an interplay between both. I'll speak from someone that's been trying to get physically fit for a long time. It wasn't until I really examined like what's getting in the way of that, because I'd sign up for all the gyms, I'd do some of the programs, I'd see a personal trainer, but then really it took me looking at my mind and saying, okay, I don't really understand why it's not working. And I examined my life. I look back and I'm like, yeah, you're working out really good, but then 7 p.m. hits, you'll go and grab a burger. And like, much of mindfulness is really looking at our habitual tendencies. So when I'm anxious, I go and do this, or when I'm sad, I'll go and do this, or when I feel lonely, this is what happens. When we can begin to understand our tendencies, our mind, we can begin to rewire it. And so often I say that mindfulness is essentially a choice, right? Because it's a choice between our stimulus, which could be the sadness, the loneliness, the anxiety, and our response, which could be to eat a burger, to doom scroll, blah, blah, blah. And the more we can be mindful, the more we give ourselves a choice. And that choice is what we do next, right? So if the choice is, hey, like, I'm paying all this money for training and for exercise, like, I'm going to commit to it. And so if we don't know we have a choice, we'll just be at the mercy of what we feel in the moment. And you would know this, right? When you wake up in the morning, you don't always want to get up and train. You don't always want to jump in the ice bath. You don't always want to meditate. But there's something inside of you that's like, oh, you know it's going to be good for your health and well-being. And then that knowing there is another option is a choice. And then I feel you get to a point where you have to decide about your why. Like, is this really important to me? And, I'm like that with my health now. Like, very recently I shared that I gave up sugar for the first time. And sugar for me was a coping mechanism ever since I was a child. It was what I would eat if, my childhood didn't feel, that my parents were fighting. I'd go and eat something sweet. And that behavior went into my adult life. And so it got to a point where the older I'm getting, I'm like, oh, I can't kind of get away with this anymore. It's really affecting my mind. And so it was a choice. But I had to get to that point where I realized that this is really important. And I think with meditation, maybe with fitness as well, we have moments kind of like the house and kind of like, the anxiety attack where life will just slap us around. And it might be a health scare where you're like, oh, I really need to make a choice right now. And I really need to choose something that's good for my health and well-being. And then it becomes creating the routines, creating the habits that allow us to do that in a way that feels accessible. Because we don't all, have hours in the day to meditate. Some of us have families, kids, jobs, multiple jobs. And so what are the conditions we can create for us to achieve that outcome becomes the next stage.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I love everything that you're saying as a coach, trying to really inspire behavioral changes, because you can have all the aspirations in the world to be this version of yourself, but unless you create the small habitual changes, it's going to be a very big leap.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I always ask my clients is like, how can you, every time you have a choice, how can you choose to embody the version of yourself that you want to become? How would that person act? Would that person take the elevator? Would that person take the stairs? Would that person drink water? Would that person drink soda? Just like the little tiny actions, and it doesn't even have to be you. You can even have a fictitious person, or maybe have multiple people, like a council. Be like, what would Tony Robbins say in this particular moment? How would Nimai train in this particular moment? Things like that. But one thing that I wanted to bring up that you mentioned, just like listening to your body, is there was a saying, I don't know if it's a Taoist saying or where the origin of the quote is, if you don't learn to listen to your body when it whispers, you'll have to listen to it scream later. So I love that, because it is these micro moments of being aware of what we're feeling, and then the behavior that follows it. Because oftentimes we just find ourselves in these compulsions without really understanding that, hey, there was something that happened one step before that inspired this compulsion.
And Gabor Mate, one of my favorite authors and theorists, talks a lot about addiction. And he says, like, all of us are addicted. We just don't know what our addictions are. Some of our addictions are healthy. They're healthy addictions, whether it's exercising, or whether it's jumping in ice baths, or whether it's having peak experience. They can be healthy. And for others, they're unhealthy addictions. And much of our work is to recognize what we're addicted to, and to be able to navigate those moments, right? To be able to listen to what it is our body is perhaps saying it really, really needs, and then the clarity of our mind saying, hey, it's not a good idea right now. Maybe it's don't have a sweet treat, maybe just have a banana, like you said, stairs or taking the elevator. So yeah, much of mindfulness is being able to reestablish that awareness.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I wanted to ask you is because also as a fitness guy, there's so many parallels between, I would say, like mindfulness, developing the mind, developing the awareness, and developing the body. They have very similar paths, I think, and I talk about the repetition, like you go into the gym, you take a barbell or dumbbell and you do a rep, one repetition over and over and over. And many people think that if you go to the gym and you have to master this full workout program and have this whole plan ahead of you, I always tell my clients, like, go in there and just master the repetition.
Yeah.
Master what it feels like to move that dumbbell with the most efficiency and most contractile tension that you could possibly put on it. Don't go in there to just move weight around for the sake of moving weight, because really you're doing yourself a disservice and you're putting that goal further and further ahead. But if you go in there with the intentionality of like, what is my intention with this movement, and how can I really challenge myself or really activate everything properly so that I can get the most out of this one repetition. And I think that that's a little bit easier to translate than it is to a mindfulness practice, because I also always encourage my clients and people to meditate. And I find it difficult to inspire them to keep showing up. And in the physical sense, you can be very outcome oriented. They want to do something because it's going to give them a six pack, or because they're going to get that beach body, or whatever the outward goal is.
Yeah.
With mindfulness, it's a little bit more abstract.
Yeah.
So how can it, whenever you approach it, is it more outcome focused or more process focused?
I mean, it's a little bit of both, but it's funny, like for new meditators, I actually use a fitness analogy, like when I go into a discussion around this, because if you look at the brain, you can imagine, is like a muscle, right? For all intents and purposes. After the age of 21, the frontal cortex of our brain, which is the part of the brain that we use to make good decisions, short-term memory, regulate our emotions, it begins to shrink. And so for all of us, after the age of 21, it begins to atrophy. But we can't stop that. That's just part of growing older. We can begin to create new neural pathways and networks in the brain, meaning like we can slow the decline of the brain. And one of the ways that we can do it is through a mindfulness practice. And often I say, one example of mindfulness is, paying attention to the breath or paying attention to sounds. And so you pay attention to the breath, pay attention to the sounds. And the moment you realize you're thinking about food or you're thinking about something else, you just come back to the breath or you come back to the sounds. And that's like a rep. And I tell people, like, the more reps you do, the more you're going to build that part of your brain, the more you're going to create a strength there, the more you're going to create new pathways, new networks. And so mindfulness and meditation isn't so much about where you go in the practice. It's about coming back. So I think the analogy is that when you go down really slow, what do you call it? The constrictive?
Eccentric.
Eccentric, I'm way off. Yeah. So it's a bit like that, right? It's about coming back in a way over and over and over again, in where you build that repetition in your brain. And the more reps you do of, mindfulness, the more times you come back, the more moments of mindfulness you experience. And so the outcome then is to get people to just imagine in that moment, like, what would it be like to be more present to the people you love in your life? What would it feel like to not be at the mercy of your stress or your anxiety or depression? What would it be like to be your baseline, to be positive and happy? And that was something I couldn't imagine when I was kind of in the throes of corporate life. Like, what would it be like for my baseline to be like this positive and chirpy and happy? The kind of people you meet, you're like, why are they like that? It's kind of weird, right? And
sus.
Yeah, I'm a little sus, right? But I've met teachers that obviously have hard times, but their baseline is this sense of like positivity and happiness. And I'm like, wow, like that's part of the outcome that if you commit to a practice, you'll be able to achieve. But beyond that, it's more for me around the clarity in which you get to see your life. The understanding that, you have two choices in every time you wake up in the morning. You can do things that'll lead you to happiness. You can do things that'll make you suffer. And there are things that are neutral in the middle, but often every moment gives you this ability, like what are you going to choose that's going to lead you in this direction, and what are you going to choose that's going to lead you in that direction?
I love that. I love the way you framed the practice was a little bit different than the way I was looking at it, because my approach was helping people just show up, just like create the space in your day to sit and just be or be with your thoughts. And the way that you explained it just now made so much sense. It's the coming back to the observation while you're in practice. Like that would be the rep, instead of sitting down and just that would be the rep, if that makes sense.
No, I don't think you're wrong in what you said. I think it's the first stage. Like just showing up is a commitment. It's an act of self-love, first of all.
It's almost like just showing up to the gym.
Yeah.
And then while you're there,
things happen,
things
right?
happen,
You never regret going.
Yeah.
Like it's just getting there is the hard part.
Yeah.
And it's exactly the same with meditation. The hardest part is like the distance between my bed and my meditation cushion.
Yeah.
But once I sit, I'm like, oh fuck, I'm so glad that I'm here.
Yeah.
And afterwards you reap the benefit of it. But then just showing up is one part. I know we spoke a little bit about, how hard it is to make this commitment. And I have this belief of think big, start small, which is your goal might be to be, less anxious. Your goal might be to be a better partner to your spouse or whatever it is, or to be, clear-minded. But then start small. Like what is the lowest amount of time you can invest into that goal? And if that is 5 minutes, then 5 minutes every day, commit to that. If it's 10 minutes, commit to that. A lot of people start by saying to themselves, I'm going to meditate 30 minutes a day. Let's go.
That's a big goal.
That's a big goal, right?
It's a big goal.
And if you have that, that's great. But often if you're going from never meditating to 30 minutes a day, you'll probably lose that. And it's another analogy is like, if I was to go to the gym, I wouldn't start the deadlift 200 kilos, right? Like I'd start like probably just with the bar and try to get the technique right and try to get my form right. And then once I find that my baseline is growing, I start to increase the weight. And it's the exact same thing in meditation. 5 minutes a day is great. Do that for 2 weeks. And then you're like, oh, this is easy. I could go up to 10 minutes and then maybe it's 15 and maybe it's 20, 30 after that. But it's the same sort of principle that we use with meditation.
Yeah, I love that. I have a very similar approach with people. I'm like, showing up is the hardest part, to go to the gym. And once you're there, even if you have a 1 out of 10 workout, that 1 out of 10 is more than what you would have done if you didn't show up to the gym. Maybe if you don't even have time to go to the gym, even doing 10 push-ups is more than doing nothing. You know, it's like, how low can you set the bar for yourself to where you actually just show up, and then the rest let it unfold as it does. And there's a quote that I love from James Clear. He wrote Atomic Habits. He said, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So what systems do you have in place to help support the long-term goal? Is that waking up earlier for you to actually have some time and space that isn't given to your pets or your children or your work or your emails or all the other things that you have to do, but really just showing up for yourself. Like you said, it's like this act of developing self-love. And really putting that into like creating that priority for yourself. Because one thing that I found too through being a fitness coach is that it's very hard to outperform the view that you have of yourself. To consistently outperform the view that you have of yourself. You may do it every now and then, but you'll always end up kind of flatlining to, if you think you're unworthy, you're always going to end up acting and behaving as someone that thinks they're this level of unworthy. And there's different degrees of it. Or maybe if you think that you're unlovable, maybe you won't give yourself that love because you don't know, why would you? You don't love yourself.
Right.
So it's like, if you don't prioritize your own well-being, then your behavior is going to the gym isn't going to reflect that. So I always work with clients to try to help them improve the view that they have of themselves, so that going to the gym and having a mindfulness practice, eating healthy, is just it's a symptom of the view that they have of themselves.
I love that. And to that point, there is a phrase we use in Tibetan Buddhism called bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is sometimes referred to in many different interpretations of it, but it's essentially this underlying Buddha nature that we have of warmth and tenderness and love. And we often say, like, when you do something nice for someone, or when you do something nice for yourself, like go to the gym, that's that intrinsic love that you have for yourself. Like that deep well of compassion and warmth and goodness that's there. That's inspiring that. Like, it's because you love yourself that you wake up in the morning and you go to the gym. It's because you love yourself that you're sitting in meditation practice, or you're doing something nice for someone that comes from a place of love. And so the more we can begin to tap into that and to recognize that there is that it's there, that quality of love for ourselves is there, but it's been obscured by all the shit things that have happened in our life, or the way that we see ourselves, or where we choose to spend our time. The more we can begin to uncover that, the more it begins to radiate outwards, right? And the more we can tap into it more readily and more often. But that takes work, because yes, I mean, for many of us, our culture has told us that we're not good enough, right? That we should do these things, that we should go and meditate to be a better person, or to take this new drink, or to wear these clothes. And so we're fed all of these messages that we're not enough. But deep down, it's recognized that we've always been enough.
Yeah.
And that love for ourselves has always been there. And when we go and exercise, it's just an expression of that. We want to feel healthy and better, but it doesn't mean that we're not a good person if we don't do it, right? It just means we love ourselves enough to show up.
I love that. Yeah, it's what's interesting about the ego too, and the mind, is that once you shine a light of awareness on something, especially when it comes to your deep wounds, it just gets more clever and goes just into the cracks of the room, into the shadows 100%. Of the room, just like ever so slightly, right? Like I can speak from experience, because whenever I first started training, it was coming from a place of lack. It was coming from a place of not enough. It was coming from a place of, I was a short guy. I was always a short guy growing up, and it made me feel unworthy or unattractive, or just all the things that somebody, a young person that's going through those things would go through. And training was my outlet. It was my way of taking control of how I could look. I could build this armor around myself to protect me from this wound that I had. And what I found is that I took it to the extreme. I took it to bodybuilding, the furthest place I could possibly take my body. And what I found was that there was an element of love in there. There was a strong element of love. And there was also a more discreet, subtle element of not enough still. And it was training, not because I loved myself, but because I just wasn't ever enough. So learning how to identify, like with real honesty and clarity with yourself, like, what is my intention with what I'm doing? Like,
100%.
Am I doing this from a place of love? Am I operating from love, or am I operating from lack or from fear, or maybe one of these wounds that exist? So it really does come back to being honest and curious and questioning your motives and your actions, even if you believe you might have a strong handle on things. Right.
And I think a good way to get to that is to ask ourselves, like, would I still love me if I wasn't this? So, often I think, like, if I wasn't the co-founder of a company, would I still love me? If I wasn't a meditation teacher, would I still love me? If I wasn't this person that seemingly other people look up to, would I still love me? And if the answer is yes, then there's a real baseline level of self-love there. But we often tend to build these versions of ourselves up that we can't sustain. And we start to think that people and us are more in love with this version of ourselves as opposed to the real us.
The real version.
And that's really hard. And self-awareness is a big tool in helping us recognize that, and then that the quality of innate love is what we need to bring to sustain that, because ultimately all of these things go, right? Like, my body will change, your body will change, our minds will change, our financial status will change, or our social status will change. And then if our sense of worth is in all of those things and not this innate quality of love within us, then we will suffer.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. Like, how much can you strip away of all the trappings, all the material possessions, all of the accolades, the titles, the status, and what's left is just you at your essence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And we call it essence love. Like that's what
Yeah.
my teacher refers to it. Is essence love is something that's not conditional,
Yeah.
right? Because so much of love can feel conditioned. I love me if I have all these things, or I love this person because they make me feel like this.
Mm-hmm.
But unconditional love, it's like almost like the kind of love a parent would have for a child.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what you do, you're still my child, and I love you. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the quality of love we can develop within ourselves.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, this is really great. I love this conversation so far. Let's change gears and talk a little bit about the breath.
Mm.
I mean, the breath seems to be the vehicle for much of this introspection and work. And maybe your words, I've heard you use anchor. You know, like what is the anchor in your meditation practice? And it can change, but it seems to be really centered or revolving around the breath. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, and the breath is powerful for many reasons. From an ancient Buddhist context, there's a story around how the Buddha almost died one day next to a river because he was trying to become enlightened. And a little girl saw him and gave her a little bit of rice because he was starving himself. And as he was getting his strength back again after eating after so many years, he had an epiphany that if I go back to basics, what is it? Like, what is going to make me enlightened? And he had this recognition that the breath was the first thing he remembered. And so breath awareness is a big part of modern mindfulness practice because it offers us the ability to anchor our minds onto something. Anchor our minds onto something that is fairly steady, that's changing and moving, but is always with us, right? So our breath is always with us. So when we focus our attention on one thing, like the breath, our mind begins to calm down. From a neuroscientific perspective, our frontal cortex has a point of attention. It gives it something to do. And so over time, when we just focus on this one thing, our mind begins to calm down. We begin to develop a sense of concentration, focus, and then also our physiology begins to change. Our immune system improves, all of this. Because as we know, there's an amazing study that was done by, I think it was Killingsworth and Gilbert from Harvard in the mid 90s or early 2000s that said a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. Because that research really showed that the more our minds wander, the more we're unhappy. Whereas even if we're doing something that we don't necessarily love, but that we're focused on it, everything in our physiology reports that we're content and happy in that moment. So that's one side, which is breath awareness. And then the other side is what we call breath work, being able to manipulate the breath in order to have a very immediate physiological response. I personally love the integration of both because breath work is a really powerful tool that enables us to go beyond the cognitive mind. So instead of having to think about things and, navigate our thoughts, the breath and being able to manipulate it shifts our mind into something very immediate, right? So, whether that's 30 rounds of breathing in and out through the nose or in and out through the mouth, or, an hour-long breathwork practice where we're breathing into the belly, chest, and exhale, we're able to shift our experience quite drastically. But then the meditation helps us to integrate that experience. Breathwork is like the door being ajar, like, someone's kicking down the door, and then meditation enables us to walk with confidence through that door.
Yeah.
And I think these days both are really necessary for us to navigate life. For a lot of people, I've been teaching meditation for 14 years. Meditation can be very hard and scary, especially if we come into it with a lot of anxiety or ADHD or a lot of distraction, pain, worry. And breathwork can be like that opening at the door, right? It enables us to just feel for the first time really present. It enables us to just feel that we have a body and we're not just existing in our mind. But then when we have a meditation practice that supports it, we're able to come back into that place more often. So anytime we get stuck in a meditation, we're able to kind of drop into the breath a little more intensely. And we're like, oh, okay, I'm able to self-regulate my emotions. Or I'm able to drop out of this anxious loop and just come back into my body. So yeah, the breath can be very, very powerful and potent, and it's with us all the time.
And it's something that we're not taught really. Like we're taught all these other resources, but we're never really taught how to breathe properly or even just be aware of it. It's just something that we find ourselves, we just kind of find ourselves in these bodies. We just kind of wake up and come to. One day we're like, oh yeah, we're operating this weird thing, and when I think of stuff, my hands move, and it just becomes so automatic that breathing feels like one of those automatic processes, like a heartbeat. Like it's like I don't have really control over it; it just happens.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I wonder like what would have happened to us if we were learnt in school how to regulate our emotions, or even regulate our nervous system through our breath. It would have just transformed.
I think that there's been so much awareness around this now that parents are really integrating this type of education to their just being like a very conscious parent on and how to teach young people, especially toddlers, infants, how to identify what feeling they're experiencing and then how to regulate it or self-soothe in a way. I have a friend who has a 5-year-old, and one day we were out and about, we were on the boardwalk, and he throws a fit, and he goes, "I'm so frustrated." And it was like a word I wasn't expecting him to use. He was like 4 years old at this point, and I'm like, did he just say frustrated? and my friend goes, "And what do we do when we're frustrated?" He goes, "I breathe." And he goes, and he just starts going into this practice, and I was mind blown. I was like, this is incredible.
I mean, two things. First of all, the ability for a 5-year-old to be able to identify what they're feeling and to express it is so healthy. Then the second thing, to have something to support that experience is like mind-blowing. I mean, adults don't even have that capability.
I didn't have that skill. I didn't have that skill until like 2 years ago. Like literally 2-3 years ago, when I first hired my first like mindset coach. It was a mindset and relationship coach, because I was going through a breakup, and I was just like desperate for anything, like any kind of support. It was learning how to articulate my experience in a way that was non-personal. It was non-blaming. It was just descriptive. It was having the language to describe what I was feeling, because before I was just pushed around. I was flooded with or activated with whatever emotion was present, and I couldn't control my response. So learning how to have those skills is something that I'm still, even as an adult today, really being present with and mindful about, because it's made such a difference in my experience, in my relationships, my relationship with myself, first and foremost, which is the basis of every other relationship. Like you said, to be aware of my body and what I'm experiencing, and just have a moment to say, what am I experiencing? Okay, there's a bit of tension, tightness in my chest. It's a bit I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling a bit upset. Where is this coming from? Like, how can I express this in a way that I'm just going to be open about what I'm feeling, and then try to give it more language for my partner or whoever to understand, myself, even to understand, whether that's through journaling or voice notes or whatever it is. And it's, like you said, such a powerful resource to have, to be able to self-resource in that way.
100%.
Yeah. So what typical breathwork resource do you share with people that struggle with maybe not struggle, but maybe they're just beginners? Is it like box breathing or?
Yeah, great question. It really depends. It's not like one size really fits all. If someone presents with a lot of anxiety, for example, or a lot of stress, or an overactive mind, I'll give them a technique to down-regulate their nervous system. So it's usually a technique like box breathing, where you'll breathe in for 4, you'll hold for 4, you'll breathe out for 4, you'll hold for 4, and you repeat that. So it's like you're breathing in a box. It's a practice that a lot of Navy SEALs use, when they're going diving, and help them, before they go into missions and things like that. Or there's another Tibetan tantric practice called vase breath, which works with wind energies in our body, or prana as we call it. If we have a lot of wind energy in our mind, we can get anxious and stressed and very heady. And so there's a technique where we breathe down into the belly, we'll hold for about 8, and then we'll exhale into the belly, all through the nose. So there are different practices that you can give, and there are different practices you'll use throughout your day. One that I use is, when I meditate in the morning, I'll do vase breath and meditation for about 45 minutes. And then if I'm having a moment where I'm highly stressed, I'll do a practice called the physiological sigh, which is, I'll demonstrate one. So you take one big breath in, then you take a little quick, short, sharp breath in, and then you exhale through the mouth, and it looks like this. and I'll do like 3 to 5 of those.
Mm.
And that technique has been known to be one of the quickest ways to get yourself into a parasympathetic state. Neuroscientists have kind of spoken about that a lot. And then there are days where, I'll do maybe 15 minutes of Wim Hof breathing or activated circular breathing. That just tends to get me into my body more, gives me a little bit more focus. I feel more of a connection to myself when I'm doing that. So it really depends what the person presents with.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of different techniques, and even more so nowadays. It's becoming a lot more popular, at least in my newsfeed on social media, seeing different people practicing different breathwork techniques or different modalities. I know I do alternate nostril breathing in the morning because it just helps me find balance in the morning. That's one of my favorites. I do box breathing as well. I'll do like 5-7-8 breathing as well. So just the long exhale,
I mean, that before you go to sleep, like 5 minutes of even belly breathing, just breathing in and out 5 to 5 transforms your sleep. And I'm someone that struggled with sleep for many years.
That's exactly when I use it for. Is if I wake up in the night and my mind just immediately, the gears start turning, I'm like, okay, how can I relax my body? How can I get back into a restful state? And I'll do like 5-second inhale, 7-second hold, 8-second exhale.
Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. So let's talk, just because we're kind of coming close to the end of this episode, let's talk about this New Year's meditation and breathwork challenge, because this is I think it's an incredible resource that you're offering for people to hopefully create a sustainable practice like we talked about, not just do a new year, new me, new yoga, new meditation, new breathwork, new fitness program. No, like let's get back to the authentic you, like the deepest parts of you, not a new version, but just remember who you've always been. And I think mindfulness and breath work is such a beautiful vehicle for that.
I mean, you said it all right there, and I love that. But I co-founded Open a few years ago, and a lot of what we're trying to do is to help people find mindfulness in their life, whether it's through the breath, through movement, through meditation, through music, all these different elements to it. And I've developed this challenge, and I hate the word challenge because it shouldn't feel like a challenge, but an invitation, let's say, of beginning the year with mindfulness. And there's so many apps out there, there's so many different teachers, styles, techniques. Even you were saying it's breathwork is everywhere on your social media feed, but we've created this challenge where show up on the app every day. You don't have to choose. There is one waiting for you. There's a practice, and this practice will be part wisdom, so it'll kind of invite you to contemplate something. You'll go into a breathwork moment, and then you'll have a meditation. And really what we're building in these first 30 days is that mental muscle, right? That muscle of mindfulness, that muscle of curiosity, that muscle of presence, compassion, all of that. And the research shows that if you do any activity for I think it's 21 days, but it's 30 days, that it becomes a habit. And so that's really what we're creating. We're creating this habit of mindfulness that not only just makes you a better meditator, but it makes you better at life. It enables you to leave your meditation cushion after the 10 minutes, which is all you have to do in the day. And you're able to move through the world, and all of these little seeds that you've planted in the morning will be there, and you'll be able to recognize them when they bear fruit throughout the day. And so 30 days, 10 minutes a day of meditation practice is the invitation.
Yeah, that's amazing. 10 minutes. That's it.
That's it.
It's a very low bar,
I mean, if you don't have 10 minutes in your day, you need to really look at your life, right? Because I always tell people, stop using Instagram, because you start using Instagram and you're using it for way more than 10 minutes. It's like hours, right? So you take 10 minutes out of your Instagram time and you put to something really positive.
I love it. I'll or lovingly call my clients forward whenever they say,
I love that.
Whenever they say they don't have time for something, I say, do me a favor, can you just open up your phone for me? And just go to the settings where it shows your screen time and what apps are you using the most here? And it's like TikTok, 3 hours. I'm like, you spent 3 hours on TikTok today, my friend. Like, can you sacrifice 10 minutes
Yeah.
of those 3 hours for a practice like this that's going to
Exactly.
yield so many benefits? It's going to
Yeah.
yield so many benefits.
Mm.
And I think, like you said, just creating that bar very low, 10 minutes is something that's very achievable, very doable.
Right.
And like you said, if you don't have the time, then maybe it's best that you find the time, because
Yeah.
it sounds like you might need it.
Yeah, I mean, the research is also, it's pretty conclusive. If you Google like in mindfulness and practice, where a 3-week meditation habit shows increased gray matter in the brain. So, we know our brains are declining the older we get, and here is one way to really safeguard it. So we can begin to really use it the way we want it to, with the people that we love and the things that we love to do. That's really what mindfulness is helping us to do, right? It's to help us in other areas of our life. So hopefully this invitation speaks to people.
Yeah. And just from personal experience, I've been using the app for the past 2 weeks or so, and it's such a convenient and like beautifully laid out app with tons of different options, whether you want a 5-minute course or 20-minute movement or a 20-minute breath work or whatever you're feeling. So not just the challenge, like you said, there's so many different other ways you can utilize the app based off of your own schedule and itinerary for the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Manoj, thank you so much, brother, for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation. You're such a pleasant guest, and so much wisdom
Thank you.
for such a short amount of time in a potent conversation. So where can we find you? I'll link all of it in the description, or is there one place in particular you want to send people?
Oh, anywhere really. Instagram is probably the only thing I'm trying to
grow right now.
I'm trying to I don't have time to do anything else, but
Yeah.
Instagram is a good spot.
Okay.
Follow Open if you check it out. We share lots of really cool educational content on Instagram or YouTube. So yeah.
All right, brother. Well,
Thanks,
thank you
brother.
so much. And for anybody that made it this far in the episode, thank you so much for watching. If you found anything useful or insightful in this episode, please do me a favor. Like this video, comment, send it to a friend. You never know what information might change somebody's life for the better. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.